who knows?
Rebecca Yarros, I think. I think she's the only one.
Yeah,
you know what? Does Rebecca Yarros even know? I'm not actually convinced. I think she's still deciding.
Welcome back to the Book on Fantasy podcast.
I'm Addison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Today's episode is all about the theories. We have quite the spread today, including big juicy theories, some lighter snack theories, and some just vibes, no thoughts theories for dessert. So hopefully there'll be a theory for everyone somewhere in here today. As a quick reminder, we are a spoiler-free podcast, but now that we are done with the book, we will have spoilers for all of Onyx Storm. It is also likely that references to Fourth Wing and Iron Flame will be made as well, so please make sure you have read all three books before continuing with this episode. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. Now that we are done with Onyx Storm, we are going to jump back into the TOG world, and we will pick back up with Empire of Storms. Apparently, we are storm hopping now. Onyx Storm to Empire of Storms and all. If you have not started TOG yet and are looking for a new series to start alongside us, then we cannot recommend TOG enough. Plus, we have about 90 hours of content dedicated specifically to TOG so far. We've covered 5 books, including Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, The Assassin's Blade, Heir of Fire, and Queen of Shadows. So plenty of content for you to keep yourself occupied with. Furthermore, Addison and I decided yet again that we don't have enough to do, so we are introducing another exciting little spin-off series. This was instigated after Sunrise on the Reaping came out. We were chatting a couple weeks ago, and I told Addison that I'd actually never read The Hunger Games before. I'd watched the first movie, but for some reason never got around to reading the books. So we started talking about how we should read it, and then we were like, wait, we can totally make this a monthly series. So we brainstormed some names, and we landed on Paging the Past, and that's paging spelled P-A-G parentheses E-I-N-G, because we're clever and shit, supposedly. But anyways, we thought it would be super fun to revisit all of our favorite or, core book series from when we were younger, including books like Hunger Games, Harry Potter, and that's right, Twilight.
I'm so excited. When Lorraine had this idea, I was literally like, I don't even know. I was just so excited. I think my soul left my body. I was like, yes, say no more. Say no more. Yes. I know we have absolutely no time and should not take on any more work, but we'll do it. We'll do it for Edward and Jacob.
So yeah, the goal is to read one of these nostalgic classics a month, and then we'll release more of like a casual book review and discussion at the end of the month for it. To be extra clear, Paging the Past episodes will not be like our deep dive theories episodes. They're meant to just be kind of like quicker book reviews, so you can consider them like a little monthly snack version of our usual full course deep dives. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that.
Think of it like our deep dives are those ridiculously bougie restaurants that have like 50 courses. You know what I'm talking about? Have you seen those on TikTok?
Yeah.
And this will be like an entree with a dessert and like maybe a cocktail, depending on how spicy Lorraine and I are feeling. I am very, very excited about revisiting the Hunger Games series. Lorraine has not read it, but I have. Although I have not read Sunrise on the Reaping, but I've read the other 4 books in the universe. And I cannot wait to do these episodes with you guys. And y'all, I cannot wait to do Twilight. When she said Twilight, as I mentioned earlier, I was like, yes, absolutely. Y'all have no idea. I'm really excited to see if my opinions on Team Edward versus Jacob have changed now that I'm, older and wiser.
Yeah.
And also just a quick thank you to everyone who sent DMs, emails, and texts with your theory ideas or what you wanted us to dive into. I know we say it all the time, but we really, truly mean it. We love hearing from you guys, so thank you so much.
Without further ado, let's get started. So to kick everything off, we decided we were going to start by comparing our predictions from our very first, preparing for Onyx Storm episode and what our answers were for that, and then comparing them to how it actually played out.
We thought it would be fun to see how comically wrong we were about all of these. So,
if you did
stuff. We did.
Actually, a fair amount of stuff, surprisingly.
True. So if you guys did not listen to that little 10-minute episode of preparing for the Onyx Storm, don't worry. We'll repeat the questions here. So the first question we asked is, what will Violet's second signet be? And both Lorraine and I said Truthsayer. And damn it, we were both wrong. Very disappointing. I gotta be honest, I feel like I was set up for failure there based on a lot of hints and language, etc. I don't feel great about dreamwalking at this time, so we'll see. But I think Truthsayer would have been better.
I think there was a lot of confirmation bias involved with wanting that to be the case, but I also don't think we're alone in what we thought it was going to be versus what it actually was. Like, I don't think anybody was expecting dreamwalking.
Yeah, you and I were talking about that. We do not remember ever seeing anyone posit the theory of dreamwalking. I'm not going to say no one ever had the idea and shared it publicly, but it never ever became even like a moderately popular theory.
Right.
The next one, I'll take this one. So we asked each other how many steamy scenes there would be, and Lorraine said 6, and I said 3. For purely academic purposes, I had to research and verify this information. The amount of spicy scenes in Onyx Storm is actually debatable depending on your definition, so I will review all the potentials for you right now. So in chapter 3 is when they wake up together and they have a little spicy time. And that's where he accidentally draws from the headboard and leaves that tiny little fingerprint. So I count that as a full spicy scene because there's lightning strikes in that one.
Okay, yeah.
Chapter 12, I don't really count this as a steamy scene. This is just a really steamy, intense kiss and some verbal foreplay after she gets back from Newhall and her knee is all injured and Brennan mends her and he's like, how could you put yourself in danger? And then begins kissing her. So I don't count that as a steamy scene. Not like in the way that I meant it. Chapter 18, very similar. I don't count this one either. This is after Halden enters the chat and Xaden gets all jealous and weird. And he's like, tell me if you loved him. I have to know. And they have like that super steamy kiss and lots of thoughts about taking it further, but they don't. So I don't count that. But I do count in chapter 25 where they break the breakfast table in Deverelli. And then they get interrupted by everyone outside of their room, letting them know that Halden has been banged by King Portland. So I think that one counts as full spicy. And then, of course, last but not least, in my opinion, my least favorite spicy scene is chapters 48 and 49. The infamous thighs and cries scene in their bedroom in Erasure. So, from my perspective, I personally count 3 of these as full spicy scenes. And I'm not just saying that so I can be right. Okay? I'm not just saying that. I'm talking about if lightning strikes, then it counts. But if there's no lightning, then it doesn't count.
There was no lightning in 48 and 49 either, though. But it was a full spicy scene.
Do you get what I mean when I say lightning?
Like the lightning coursing through her?
I'm talking about...
No, I know.
I'm talking about, when she, the big...
Yes, I know. Well, okay, fine. I'm going to say we'll just call it a tie.
No way!
Because it's more than 3. Chapter 3, chapter 25, 48 and 49.
12 and 18 are just 2 kisses. Steamy kisses. Those aren't spicy.
I know, that's what I'm saying. The full ones that you counted are 3, 25, 48, 49. That's 4. And then 12 and 18 don't count.
Chapter 48 and 49 are the same scene. It's just across 2 chapters.
Yeah, but across 2 chapters.
Get out of here. Okay. Go to the next one.
Ooh. Okay. Next question. Will Violet cure Xaden in this book? We both said no.
We were both right about that. I think, given that it's a 5-book series, most people probably were on the same page with that. So I have a follow-up question for you, Lorraine, and that is, do you think that she will actually cure him in book 4?
I'm feeling closer to it, but it wouldn't be until like the very end of the book. The book ends with Xaden being cured or something like that.
Okay, so you don't think like it'll happen like mid-book and then the rest of the series will be how they battle Berwyn and everybody else?
I don't know. I guess we'll see, but I feel like a lot of book 4 will revolve around curing Xaden. And so, whatever, I'll stick to my guns and I'll just say the end. Because I know you want to take the middle one, right? You want to take the other option.
Well, okay, you've got 3 options in my opinion. One is Xaden is a Venin until the end. And basically Violet has to make this big choice about like, I can get rid of all Venin, but I have to kill Xaden, this big dramatic choice, and then he gets resurrected or something like that. Okay. The second option is there is no cure, there's only control. And he somehow, between some sort of magical intervention and whatever, learns how to control it and just lives that way in perpetuity. Or I think he'll be cured at some point in book 4, and then book 5 will be all about how they overcome and they team up and they defeat the Venin once and for all. So,
right.
Yeah, those are kind of my 3, like how it could go.
Yeah, that's fair.
So next we asked who would die in this book. Lorraine's exact words were, it's not going to be a super main character, but I could see a squad mate dying. And I said Imogen or Quinn. I'm not happy that Quinn is dead, but I am happy I called that. I don't know how I did that. That was just like literally pure luck. That was really no thoughts, just vibes, to be totally honest.
But you got it. So next question, will they find more of Andarna's den? We both said yes.
And we were correct. Hooray!
Yeah.
No surprise there. I kind of feel like that was the purpose of book 3, is to find the Irids.
Yeah.
Next we asked, will Xaden draw power from Violet, either on purpose or accidentally? We both said yes, and I'm actually surprised we were wrong about this. I didn't think he would do it purposely, but I really thought it would be on accident. I thought it would be like during spicy time, and he would feel her power, and then it would be like this big dramatic thing. So I was actually surprised that he did not.
Yeah, that's fair. We almost had it with the headboard scene, but
yeah, it was close.
Didn't happen.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a good thing. So next question. Is Dane's dad a Venin and or working with the Venin? And we both said no.
I'm going to say we were right-ish about this. Of course, it's unconfirmed in this book, but I still think he is not, and we actually will talk about potential Venin in upper leadership later in this episode, so I'll leave it at that for now.
I'm going to say undecided on this. I think I'm kind of neutral about it, because there's still 2 more books and opportunities for like other leadership and other people to like come out, which we'll talk about it when we get there. But
not to mention anyone can turn at any time. Just because he wasn't Venin.
True.
Potentially in this book doesn't mean he can't turn Venin in the next book. Next, we asked, what will Garrick's signet be? And we both said distance building. Ayo! We were right about that. Yeah, that was super exciting. That's still, I think, the coolest signet, honestly.
It would be helpful if you're sharing it on
Hell yeah. I mean, just daily life.
That was just referencing Rebecca Yarris's hint about a second signet. I forget if she's talking specifically about Garrick's, but
I think they asked her if she was stranded on a deserted island, who would she want with her and why? And she wouldn't say why, but she was like, definitely Garrick. And we were all like, oh, distance building, duh. I think that was a pretty popular fan theory.
Next question, will they go to the Isle Kingdoms? And we both said yes for that, and we were correct.
I think that one's kind of a layup, so I'm not surprised we were right. I was surprised that we skipped Loisum, and obviously we'll talk about that later, but I feel like that's very intentional.
Yeah, I would think so. If we went to every other one except that one, then clearly there's something special about it. So
Next, will Violet find her father's mysteriously absent but often referenced research? We both said yes, but Lorraine also added at least part of it. So my follow-up question for Lorraine is, do you think that there is more hidden research out there from Asher to Violet?
I think there is more to this. We still never got the full reason Papa Sorrengail was researching the Feathertails in the first place. The only thing we learned is that the Isle Kingdoms were involved with the Second Krillin Uprising. We speculated that the Isle involved was Umbriel, and their trade that they requested for their army to help was dragons, specifically dragon eggs, so they could raise them how they want. But that's purely speculatory. That was never actually confirmed as to like if it for sure was Umbriel and if that's what Umbriel wanted. But based off of what we learned while we were in that Isle, that's what we speculated. So without knowing the why, I believe that there's absolutely more because, Asher started all this research in the first place. What's the conclusion? What prompted it? What did he know about Feathertails? Was it Feathertails in reference to juvenile dragons or Feathertails in reference to Irids? Because we learned Irids keep their Feathertails. There's just a lot of unanswered questions surrounding that. It feels like there's more to it that we need to learn about to fully understand the context.
That's a fair point. I could really go either way. I'm kind of on the fence. I'm wondering if maybe there's not more specific hidden research for Violet, but Violet will realize that her father was doing this other research that is public, but she'll be able to read between the lines and maybe piece things together or something. I could also see that being the end of the line for Asher's research. Also, I want to point out that she found 6 other tomes, and we never really got any insight into what information those offered. We really only got insight into what the first one offered. So it's very possible that his research will come back up in that way as just more investigation or more references info for finding a cure, etc. Or like you said, more about feather tails and the irids and all that.
Next question. Will we find out why Violet has silver hair? Addison said yes, and I said no.
And I feel very good about this. Right. I mean, for me, based on this book, there's obviously way more to Violet's dedication and the process and finding out more. But I feel like we do have enough information to say that, yes, we know the reasoning. We'll find out more about like the symbolism of it and all that in the future books.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
The last question we asked, the most important one, will you cry in this book? And Lorraine said, I want to say yes, but I could see myself not crying. I didn't cry in Iron Flame. And then I called Lorraine a heartless Venin and said, I will definitely sob.
I definitely ended up tearing up on multiple occasions. Taryn almost dying, Xaden's monologue in Hedotus about not wanting to feel its emotions, Quinn's death through Imogen's eyes. I think it was the fact that it was through Imogen's eyes. I really, to be honest, would not have cared that much about Quinn if it had not been from Imogen's perspective, because we just didn't know Quinn enough to
I think that's very
for me to have cared if it had been through Violet's eyes. But with that specific spin on it, yes, it was pretty emotionally devastating.
I completely agree with that, actually. I actually cried a few times in the book. Specifically, I remember very distinctly the first time because I was at your house and I had to go in the other room when I thought Taryn was going to die in chapters 10 and 11 when he crashes into the mountain and knocks himself out. It's just the audiobook narrator and she's like, I'm not ready to meet Malik. And Andarna, you have to live. I was just like, oh. And then when Andarna left, I cried. When Mira almost died, I cried. And then when Quinn died, I also cried. I think you're absolutely right, though, seeing it from Imogen's perspective, because Imogen is just so strong and hard and, I don't want to say emotionless, but she's so tough, so seeing her so desperately sad and just emotional, it was really gut-wrenching. But I didn't cry when Xaden turned Venin. I was mostly I was just relieved.
Kind of expected.
Yeah, I was just relieved so I didn't have to hear it's not if/when. I don't know. I was just finally, one decision to cure it or turn.
Yeah, it was being dragged out for quite a while, but
it truly was.
Yeah.
So that wraps up the review of our prediction questions. I'm pretty proud of ourselves. I thought we did pretty good. So I look forward to doing this again for book 4 in the future. The first theory we want to jump into is the balance theory. What balances exist? So in chapter 46, Link's one of the first year's manifest shadows, and Violet says, I don't understand. You're our generation's shadow wielder. Xaden responds, not anymore. Magic knows he's the balance. This concept is also supported at the end of the book when Violet battles Theophany and she confirms the rule of magic, and we learn Lilith was the balance for Theo. Here are the known confirmed balances in the series so far. This is also a callback to Fourth Wing when Andarna says, nature likes all things in balance. So here are the known confirmed balances. Xaden and Lynx, Lilith and Theophany are also confirmed by Theophany herself. And that is actually it for confirmed signet balances in the series so far. For unconfirmed balances, we have quite a lineup. And my personal favorite is Sloane and Naelin. We know Naelin was a siphon and presumably used his siphon signet to save Brennan, and it quote-unquote cost him everything. They didn't say he died, they said it cost him everything. It is highly speculated among the fandom that Naelin is a Venin and turned Venin in the process of trying to save Brennan from death, and that he didn't have enough power, so he decided to channel from the earth. We know that Sloane is also a siphon, and nature likes things in balance, and so this theory seems very, very plausible to me.
I would agree with that. The fact that they're both siphoned specifically, we know for sure that that is the same signet manifesting, especially because there's some other ones where we're going to talk about Auric and Melgren soon too, but it's not 100% an apples to apples signet comparison, and we never get confirmation of whether it's a category of signets that can balance each other or if it has to be an exact signet match. Based off of the ones that we do have confirmed, it kind of feels like it's leaning towards being exact because Xaden and Link's shadow specifically, Theophany and Lilith storm wielding specifically. But there's also only 2 confirmed ones to really go off of right now, so I don't know. But I would agree with everything you said. Naolan being Venin seems highly probable to me. Sloan being a Siphon, it makes sense.
The math is mathin' on that.
The math is mathin', yes.
So to your point exactly, the next 2 that we want to talk about are Auric and Melgren. This does seem very plausible, but there are some minor hangups. So just a reminder that Auric's precognition is not fully confirmed in Onyx Storm. It's pretty obvious, and Violet puts it together that he probably is, but Auric himself has yet to confirm that. But for the sake of argument, let's assume he has in fact manifested true precognition of any and all events, and it does not seem like the Marked One's relics block his vision, whereas Melgren is said to only have battle foresight, and he cannot see the outcome if more than 3 marked ones are involved. So the argument for them being balances of each other is that both of these signets are a type of precognition. The question is, does a type of precog need a balance, or does it have to be specific, as Lorraine said? Does it have to be apples to apples? Are there 2 Venin with precognition, one for battles and one for true precog like Auric? We don't know. I think the theory has some potential. We know that there are definitely traitors in Navarian leadership, as Panchak proved. However, my big hangup is that I just don't see Melgren being a Venin. And more importantly, I don't see what his motivation would be to turn. He is bonded to the most powerful dragon. He has an incredibly rare and special signet. He's about as high up as you can go in Navarian leadership. And so to me, I'm like, what purpose would he have in turning Venin? Because, I mean, does he really need more power? I don't think so. Because where Panchak, it tracks, right? He's sort of at the limitations of his promotion because, they're limited by their signets and their dragons. And back and forth, it's foreshadowed that Panchak has his eyes on Melgren's job, and Violet's like, oh, he'll never get it because you can't beat precog for battles to lead the military, right? So, I don't know. I will, however, counter my own point. In Iron Flame, at the Battle of Besgaeth, Melgren was insistent about putting basically all Navarian forces at the Samara outpost instead of Besgaeth. What if he purposely did that under the premise of, quote-unquote, seeing the outcome so the Venin could have easier access to Besgaeth and the Wardstone? Of course, you have to throw in the Marked Ones element and how that affected his vision and decision-making, but I do find it potentially suspicious.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess to offer another example, though, he did warn them in Onyx Storm about, Xaden flying into battle and how that wouldn't be good for them or whatever. And so I guess then we have one possible betrayal situation, one situation where maybe it was not betrayal. So it's kind of like neutral at this point. But in general, I would agree with the point, particularly about his reason. It feels like turning Venin is strongly predicated on the condition of someone not feeling like they have enough power or not feeling satisfied with the power that they have. So you need a motive. And it doesn't seem like we've been set up to believe Melgren has a strong motive. So...
But it's also possible, just being conspiratorial, Lorraine. What if Melgren lied because they didn't want Xaden to fly into battle so the Venin had a higher chance of winning? You know what, Lorraine? As you say, never let him know your next move.
Never let him know your next move.
So no, I don't believe Melgren is a Venin. I don't think he will become one, but we just got to put it out there because, well, that's what this episode is for, all the theories. The next 2 are more confusing and less clear, but worth mentioning. Lilith and Theophany were supposed to balance each other. However, we're pretty sure Theo also had distance wielding. She disappears from Jack Barlow's cell in the prologue and outside of Dune's temple in the attack on Eratia. So is she the balance for Garrick? Because we know Garrick has distance wielding. But of course, the fallacy of that is that distance wielding is technically unconfirmed, and it is confirmed that she's a storm wielder and was Lilith's balance. So can a Venin balance more than one rider? Can a rider balance more than one Venin? Similarly, last up is Violet and Berwyn. We know Violet and Berwyn are both Dreamwalkers, so it seems likely that they balance each other. It is also Lori and I's opinion, based on the conversation with Theo, that there is no balance for Violet's lightning wielding signet because Theophany says once a century or so we get to tip the scales. The implication being there is only one lightning wielder, and whatever path they choose will tip the balance of power between good and evil. And then I just will randomly throw out there, in Iron Flame and more in Onyx Storm, there is mention of some of the Venin having fire or ice. And so it is likely that they are balances for other fire and ice wielder riders. Like, we know Riddick has ice, Aurobind even had fire. There's a lot of ice and fire wielders, probably on both sides, I would say.
Yeah. You have a lot of more common signets that we see Venin using, as well as riders, and those seem much more generic. But it seems like the ones that really make a huge impact in terms of the balance are these extra powerful rare signets.
Agreed. So that wraps up our balance theory. So next we'll move on to, will there be a new first 6? And who will they be? So this theory was sparked based on the excerpt from chapter 2. It reads, the rarest of signets, those that rise once in a generation or century, have manifested concurrently within equal twice in our records, both critical times in our history, but only once have the 6 most powerful walked the continent simultaneously. As fascinating as that spectacle must have been, I would rather not live to see it happen again. A study on signets by Major Dalton Cisneros. The first 6 came together during the Great War 650 years ago. Our theory now is that we are facing the next and probably the last quote-unquote Great War with the Venin. This excerpt seems to allude to the idea that a new powerful 6 could rise again because the need to protect the continent balance of magic has arisen with the impending war. I guess not an impending war, with the current war with the Venin.
So let's start with our top contenders, aka people we feel for sure have signets that count as ultra rare and powerful signets. So first off, of course, we have Violet, and she has pure power that's shaped as lightning. And then her second signet is Dreamwalking. Next, we have Imogen, who has memory wiping. And then her second signet was revealed to be most likely stone or earth wielding. Like, that's, again, not explicitly confirmed, but based on the context, it seems very likely that that's what it is. After that, we have Garrick, who has wind manipulation and then distance walking. And then we have Xaden, who has shadows, and then he's also an intrinsic. However, as far as his powers go, yes, he has ultra rare powerful signets, but now he's also Venin. So I'm kind of like, I don't know what to do with that, or like where to place him right now.
Yeah.
But I would imagine otherwise then like Lynx, who manifested shadows, could be that. But I mean, at this time, Lynx is definitely nowhere near as powerful of a shadow wielder as Xaden was, or is, I should say.
The question of like how being Venin impacts that kind of complicates things quite a bit.
So as far as other strong contenders go, because that was only 4 strong signets so far, we have Auric, who has true full precognition. We have Sloan, who is a siphon, and siphons are known to be very uncommon, and so it's rare to have one. Mira has ward extension, and we've kind of seen this expand throughout the books as well. Like in Onyx Storm, we've seen her almost develop more of like a shielding type of use for her wards, and so that seems to suggest it's pretty strong. But also ward extension in general, or like ward creation, is very rare also. We also have Dane, and he is a memory reader. And then we also learned in Onyx Storm that he is definitely a lot stronger than we originally thought, according to what, Sloane's comment was. We also have Riddick, who has a very strong manifestation of ice wielding. And then we have Ree, who has summoning. And I can't remember exactly where it was, but I'm fairly sure that when Ree developed her signet, it was noted that I don't think anybody has had that signet before. I think it's a new signet. I could be misremembering that, but either way, it's very uncommon and very rare as well.
I am of the very strong opinion that the next 6 will mirror the original, and by that I mean the quote-unquote new 6 will have one of each colored dragon and will mirror the signets of the first 6. Of course, we only know of 2 of the first 6, Warwick and Lyra, and we do not know their signets. So here are my top contenders, with the added element of dragon color being heavily emphasized. For the black dragon, this one is pretty obvious. Duh, Violet. She has dreamwalking and lightning wielding, pretty much makes her untouchable. Although Melgren is very powerful and has a cool signet and a black dragon, I just think it's Violet hands down. Next, for the blue dragon, this one is a little trickier. The obvious answer is Xaden. However, him being a Venin complicates things, and I do not think he will be able to be part of the new 6. So that's a really big question mark. I could see Xaden being cured in book 4, and then book 5 is him and Violet, and the new 6 kicking Venin ass. Or I could see Xaden staying Venin until the very end and then being cured or resurrected or any other number of outcomes, as I mentioned earlier. So the backup for the blue is Auric. He clearly has an incredibly rare and invaluable signet and is pretty powerful, and he's an important character in the book, and his importance is continuing to grow. For the green dragons of the writers, we know you have 2 options, Mira or Rhiannon. While I love Rhi, and I think her signet is really cool, and as you said, uncommon, I think Mira has her beat for this slot. The brown dragon, this one's super easy for me. I think it's Garrick, easily the most powerful rider of a brown dragon, exceptionally powerful wind builder and distance building. And remember, specifically, Violet tells Xaden in Iron Flame there hasn't been a distance builder in centuries, implying that the last distance builder could have been from the original 6. The orange dragon, this one I also feel pretty solid about. Imogen. Being able to wipe memories and being an earth wielder, pretty solid chance it's her, especially when you throw in that line from Sawyer from the beginning of the book. Then you're fucked because I can't think of a single rock or earth wielder in our history. My only hang up on this is that I feel pretty strongly that basically everything about the first 6 would be documented, especially their signets. And I feel like that's just something everyone would know. Sort of how, like, everyone can remember George Washington was the first president, and then most of us can't name another one until Abraham Lincoln. So I feel like if one of the first 6 was an earth wielder, then people would know that. So Sawyer would not say, there's never been one in our history. It would have been a line like, there hasn't been an earth wielder in 600 years or, whatever.
I was going to say, though, he's not necessarily saying that there's never been one, though. He just says he can't think of a single one or earth wielder in her history. So I'm not going to say that it's not necessarily that there's never been one, but I mean, maybe it is the case where it was just never included in history, or maybe that part of history has been hidden away or altered or changed in some way, so it's not available for knowledge. So that was like the only thing I was going to say about that. But
no, you're totally right. We have been proven time and time again how things are worded, and the nuance of the wording is super important. So no, absolutely. And it's also possible the new 6 could have different signets from the original. They don't have to match. They just have to be 6 powerful rare signets. And then last but not least, the red dragon. We have 2 choices that both have merit, Sloane and Dane. I was leaning towards Sloane, but in the last decade, there have been 2 siphons, Naelin and Sloane. So either it's not that rare, or it's just that Naelin turned Venin and Sloane manifested to be his balance. Another argument for Sloane is that because she's a marked one, she could manifest a second, even more rare signet that's still in the realm of possibilities. The argument for Dane, he does have what seems like an unheard of signet, and based on the line from Sloane at the end of the book, someone like you shouldn't have this much power. It seems like he is pretty powerful. So I think both of those are good contenders. I'll also add, although at this point it seems a little unlikely to me, it's possible it could be a writer that we have yet to meet or has yet to be featured. So that's not out of the realm of possibilities. There's nothing that says it has to be someone we know of already.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. In general, very much agree we are going to see a new group of first 6 writers, and it does make sense that we're going to see each of the corresponding dragon colors as well, because that's what was needed to create the wards in the first place, right? Like to get them up. And so that implies you had to have at least one of those during the very first war, 30 years ago, when they first made the ward stone and everything. However, I don't necessarily feel convinced that it's going to be exactly the same signets. I think there could be some overlap because of the lightning wielder and the shadow wielder, and the excerpt from Dalton Cisneros about they don't necessarily manifest concurrently. And the comments that he's made about shadow and lightning wielders haven't been seen for centuries, but like the last time they occurred at the same time was this and all that stuff. So I think we could see some overlap with some of those signets, but I'm not convinced that we're going to see all of the same ones necessarily. But there will be a group of very powerful ones. So I'm kind of curious to see what those other ones will end up being, because now I really want to know. I really like this theory, and so
Me too.
I'm hoping it comes to fruition.
I want to manifest it. I'm not as locked in on the signets have to be the same, but I am very locked in that it has to include one color of each dragon. For whatever reason, I think it has to. I think part of that is because of the way the wardstone had to be fired, the 6 and the 1 and all that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I love this theory. In my mind, it's canon. Like, oh, this is already happening. So if it doesn't, I'll be like, wait, what? You're missing a very important part of the book, Rebecca.
So moving on to the next theory. This one explores what is possible with Violet's dream walking signet. Is she actually a mind walker? And I actually found a pretty interesting Reddit post that brings up some interesting points. So this is a theory from someone called Responsible Low 9505. And they posit that what Andarna gifted Violet is actually very scary, so referring to her mind-walking capabilities. So we know from Rebecca Yarros' interview that we've only seen about 10% of Violet's second signet, which is crazy. And both the Irids and Theophany have alluded to this idea that something about Violet is very dangerous. And we, through discussions on the podcast and everything, have concluded that it's likely the mind walking, and this thread is related to that idea as well. So they basically believe that Violet is not just a dream walker, she is a full-on mind walker. And Andarna gifted Violet the power over people's minds. They say, we know when people are asleep, their minds are in the most vulnerable state because they can't shield themselves while asleep. That's why Berwin is constantly able to invade Xaden's unconscious state of mind and mess with him. And Violet is subconsciously walking into his mind and bears witness to what Xaden is going through firsthand. We've also seen examples of Violet, being able to remove herself within the dream now. She can see and feel everything that's going on. She also has, on a couple occasions, primarily through Xaden's dreams, we've seen her meddle and a little bit of degree, depending on how you're reading it and how you're interpreting it, like control some of the actions within those dreams. The person also goes on to say that they feel this capability with Berwin is how Berwin was able to force Xaden to walk away from his friends at Drathis and come to him. He was able to get past Xaden's mind shields and meddled with his actions just like Violet did in Xaden's dreams as well. And the person does address that maybe Berwin calling Xaden to him and feeling the urge to seek out his sage and Xaden being unable to kill him could be Venin related, but they don't feel this translates to the higher up Venin being able to straight up control their initiate's actions. This person feels this is more of a Berwin thing. So all in all, very interesting. Any theories that we read, we'll definitely make sure we put those in the episode description so you can take a look at them yourself. But with regards to this, I especially found the point about Berwin's ability to quote unquote control Xaden being more specific to Berwin rather than it being like this thing that all sages or mavens can possibly do. And that would also explain why Theophany tells Violet, and when you come with him, you will remember that I let you live today and choose me, not Berwin, as your teacher. Besides the fact that he's subpar and you'd be chained to him, powerless to resist his orders. I'll let you keep both your dragons while giving you what you want most in the world, control and knowledge. I think that specific quote, knowing what we know now, reads a little bit different. And if you consider this idea that maybe this had everything to do with Berwin's specific mind-walking ability, and a little bit less so about all sages and mavens, because we know Theophany was a maven, and so why wouldn't she say the same thing or be doing the same thing if she could, I guess, right? But then again, at the end of the day, none of this is confirmed, so we will have to see. To add further evidence for the idea that Violet's dreamwalking, so back in chapter 41, when Violet comes clean to Riddick about Xaden being Venin on the Minor Isle, she says, I don't have all the answers, Riddick. I just know that I have to find them, whether they're in a forgotten book or some dark wielder's head. That seems like a flippant little line, but we definitely think that's important, and it was in there for a reason. Violet presumably will be able to enter into a Venin's dream state mind as well. And why else would it be considered so dangerous unless the implication is that she can see or learn everything in their mind, not just things that they are dreaming about. Xaden also refers to Violet's dream walking as a form of intrinsic, which I feel like signifies that Violet has the possibility of exploring all thoughts, not just dreams. However, I will still caveat, I think they will still need to be asleep or like in a dream state, like not necessarily fully conscious, right? Because like you have the shields thing and all that going on. To add a little bit more evidence, we've seen a couple examples of Violet meddling and interfering within Xaden's dreams, and that signifies that there is potential for her to be able to influence what people do in real life by messing with what they do in their dreams. Again, I really don't think that both the Irids and Theophany would consider Violet to be so dangerous unless the signet has the potential to affect what happens in real life. Because like messing with somebody in their dreams doesn't necessarily feel like that terrifying. Of course, I'm sure like if you were the person in that dream being like suspended, it'd be really scary. And, like wouldn't want that to happen. But as long as you're not like dying, like at some point, like
Yeah. Like the
you'll wake up or whatever.
implications aren't as big. Like the stakes aren't as high for that.
Yes, yes, yes. But in addition, we've also discussed how maybe Violet can bring people into a dream state or like hold them in their dreams, thus making it maybe impossible for somebody to wake up unless like some greater force acts on them, like pain, for example.
I'll add to these thoughts that Rebecca Yarros confirmed in her Onyx Storm tour interviews that we've only seen about 10% of what Violet can do with her second signet. That means there is a lot more to learn. Another point I've seen argued, which seems very logical to me, is that, as Lorraine alluded to, exclusive dreamwalking seems like a pretty weak-ass signet. And by that I mean it's easily foiled. If Violet can only do it when she sleeps and the other person sleeps, that would seem to limit her quite a bit. Not to mention, so far all she can do is be aware during someone else's dream. How is that going to help her do anything? She can't make someone dream about a cure or give her information about the Irids or Xaden or whatever. So it seems much more likely she'll be able to do far more than just enter dreams and even manipulate in someone's dreams. Because, as Lorraine, I know you feel pretty strongly that she influenced Xaden's decision, like he tries to draw from the ground and she stops him. Even though she did, it didn't change anything. It didn't change the past. So
True.
Anybody can relive a moment in a dream that Violet can change, but it doesn't change reality. At least so far, not yet. I also just cannot let go of the quote from the Irids that Lorraine mentioned earlier. The Irids have been around for a long time and clearly possess special magic and knowledge. And if they're saying it's far more dangerous than lightning, then I know it's something more than entering people's dreams. It just has to be. Or the expansion of this signet is so vast that it will have just ridiculously powerful implications. And ultimately, if you zoom out, you have to ask yourself, how does this drive the story? How does this drive the plot? What plot device will this signet give us that allows us to do X, Y, and Z? And the way I see it, dreamwalking ain't going to get us nothing. But mind-walking, woo! That's going to get us a lot. A lot.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel pretty good about this one, too. I really like the potential of it, and
Me too.
I hope it comes to be, but we shall see. Moving on to the next theory topic. Who is the new brother? So if you listen to our final episode covering chapters 61 through 66, we definitely talked about this a little bit, and Addison and I both feel pretty strongly that it's Bodhi, but we'll still walk through a lot of the reasons why we feel that way and also present a couple other fun possibilities, even if we don't strongly feel that attached to those. To answer this question of who is the new brother, we'll start with the hints from Rebecca Yarros during her Denver tour. Rebecca said to look for two things. Number one, who is missing at the end? She doesn't specify what she means by the end exactly, but we are assuming kind of like the last few chapters there. Number two, who doesn't feel like what they're given is enough, or who doesn't feel like they have enough power, since that speaks on somebody's motivation for turning Venin. So in addition to this, we know from Xaden's POV, this new brother is someone who has watched Xaden stumble and fall over the last 5 months. That suggests it's someone who either has known since the very beginning or perhaps as part of learning was informed that he's been Venin for 5 months now. Depends on how you, I guess, interpret that line. The other point, he is the last person Xaden would have expected to turn, and that suggests that this person is close and trusted by Xaden. So our top contender, the person who best fits all of these factors, seems to be Bodhi, especially because of the clue about being someone who didn't feel like the power they were given was enough. Bodhi has been Xaden's second since he was born. He never wanted to rule, he just wanted to be a writer. For example, Xaden and Bodhi have arguments in both Chapter 51 and Chapter 55 about Bodhi taking over Tyrrendor should anything happen to Xaden. Bodhi's line from Chapter 55 especially signifies this when he says, "You are the Duke, I am the Rider. That's how it was always meant to be until our parents got themselves executed. I will stand by your side and be your right hand for the rest of our lives. But if you want a member of our family to hold that seat, you'd better hold your own shit together." He then walks out of the room without another word. We've also read several comments and observations from Violet about Bodhi always being overlooked and underutilized. And then we also see his signet not work against Theophany, which likely had to be really hard to take. And he was shocked and said, "My signet is always the balance." And so disappointment for Bodhi.
I really want to emphasize this point because Bodhi seems really distraught that his signet didn't work. And I think, as you said, this really plays into Rebecca Yaros's comment about focusing on someone who feels that what they have been given is not enough. Think about the end of Onyx Storm from Bodhi's perspective. We strongly speculate based on his conversation with Violet that he does not have a second signet, unlike Xaden, Garrick, Imogen, and Liam. That already had to make him feel pretty inadequate by comparison. Then throw in, from his perspective, he thinks he is quite literally the balance for all Venin's signets. And then he's confronted with the reality that not only does his signet, is not the balance, but it doesn't work at all. It has zero effect. He can do nothing to protect Violet, to protect anyone. And he's watching everyone else go above and beyond, fighting the Venin and Drathus. And he has just learned that he is essentially useless. I mean, to be totally honest, I know he can still fight on his dragon and everything, but you get what I mean. From our signet perspective, he's got nothing to offer. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so for someone who all this time has thought he has this unique signet, this value to the war effort, to then have that taken away in that moment, I think it just really lines up perfectly for him to have a downfall. Not to mention, as you also pointed out, he does not want to be Duke. He has made that very, very, very clear. And it seems he feels strongly enough that potentially that was also part of a catalyst for his decision to turn.
Yeah, I'll even add, I've seen some discourse specifically about Bodhi not being able to counter and people speculating that maybe his motivation for turning Venin, if he is the new brother, had to do with the fact that if he became Venin, then maybe he could finally counter the Venin signets.
Oh, like it was an altruistic reason. I mean, sort of like Xaden, right? I like that idea.
I like it better than like him just
Yes.
being greedy for like power and becoming Venin.
He's tired of playing second fiddle to Xaden and he's like, I'll show him. Yeah, totally.
Right. Anyways, he seems like he has the most reason to turn of any of the candidates. So,
absolutely.
In addition, in Xaden's POV, he mentions that the dragon of the new brother is unconscious, and from Imogen's POV, we do see that Cure is injured with a hole in his wing and a laceration across his chest. So it's definitely possible that Cure would end up unconscious from his injuries. We also see in Imogen's POV toward the end of it that Bodhi is seen, quote unquote, rushing on the ground. And that totally could be because he actually pulled power.
Please reference my breakdown of the definitions of vomiting versus retching in the deep dive of chapter 61 through 66. I will not rehash it here, but just know there is a difference between vomiting and retching. And I think it's very possible retching is meant to give you the indication that he is trying to vomit. But in reality, I think he's convulsing because he's pulling power from the ground.
Yes. I'm raising my existent eyebrows a lot. Last but not least, if Bodhi is the new brother, it would make the rush marriage between Xaden and Violet make a lot of sense. If Bodhi turned, that means that he can't take over Tyrrendor, leaving its seat of power vulnerable. And we know even from like Imogen's POV that this is like a huge concern among the marked ones. They do not want any chance of Tyrrendor's seat to be overtaken by a Navarian puppet, essentially, right? They want it to be someone of their choosing and someone that they trust. We also know that Violet promised in Onyx Storm that she'd help Xaden protect Tyrrendor, so presumably he's cashing in on that promise to ensure someone that he trusts can lead Tyrrendor.
I cannot emphasize this point enough. I actually feel so strongly about this that if Bodhi isn't the new brother, I'm going to be genuinely pissed because the plot makes zero sense. There's absolutely no reason for them to get married unless Tyrrendor was vulnerable, aka there's no more Bodhi to take over. If Xaden was worried about Bodhi potentially dying and not having an heir and all that, then he would have discussed getting married with Violet very early on, and they would have gotten married at literally any other point in the story, just as a backup plan in case something happened with Bodhi. I don't believe that Xaden would marry her as a Venin when he feels he's quote-unquote not whole, not himself under any circumstance, unless it was absolutely crucial and vital to Tyrrendor's safety. And so I just don't understand this plot point if Bodhi is not the new brother. And I feel like very strongly about that, actually. Like, I'm getting a little heated. The last thing I want to add was a thread I found on Reddit from Just Here for the Books _ They reference the excerpt from chapter 11 of Iron Flame, which reads, Garrick has always been my best friend. His father was my father's aide, which in a way makes him my Dane, except trustworthy. After Liam, Bodhi was and still is the closest thing I have to a brother, perpetually tagging along, a step behind. Recovered correspondence of Lieutenant Xaden Ryerson to Cadet Violet Sorrengail. When I read this, I was king prawn, baby. I was like, this pretty much sealed the deal for me. Yep. Okay. It's Bodhi.
Yeah. No, I think that fits really well. And like to the earlier quotes too, Bodhi has said, I will always be by your side and be your right hand. Right?
Oh,
So like
yeah.
presumably following him into Venonness as well to like support him. I don't know.
I was going to say instead of sickness and health and Venonness and not,
Yeah, anyways, safe to say Bodhi is our number one contender. So as a runner-up, though, the second possible candidate could be Garrick. Garrick checks the boxes relating to knowing about Xaden's struggle for the last 5 months and also being someone who is very close with Xaden and therefore unexpected. And he was named as a missing rider by Brennan in Chapter 66. And the last time we see him on page is at the end of Imogen's POV, which was also the last time that we saw Bodhi on page as well. We do see in Imogen's POV that she notes that there are 3 felled dragons, 4 more lie wounded along the walls to the west, beside innumerable griffins, and one of those dragons is a brown with a fatal wound from a severed tail. But I think if that was Crod, we would definitely know because Imogen would be able to recognize him. And so I get it because, Crod is a brown dragon. However, he would be very recognizable to Imogen because of Imogen's close relationship with Garrick as a marked one. And so I would feel like it'd be really weird for her not to name him.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I also could see that it's possible to read Garrick's words to Imogen about how he can't walk again. Even if I made it to Eratia, I'd never be strong enough to get back. So I'd better find some way to do something as code for Garrick turning so that he could continue using his distance walking signet. But while I was reading that, I really didn't read it that way. It read to me that Garrick has accepted his limits for the time being. And so he's finding a different way to be helpful that doesn't require his signet.
I completely agree with you on this point. I think it's written that way to make you entertain the possibility, but for me, it just doesn't track. Garrick has been invaluable to this battle and countless other times. He definitely does not seem like he feels that what he has been given is quote unquote not enough. And so I think this is a little bit of maybe it'll make you think, he's out of energy. Maybe he got desperate and drew from the source. And I just don't read it that way at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The thing that doesn't add up is the point about Garrick's motivation for turning Venin. Garrick already has 2 signets, and his distance walking is extremely rare and powerful. So in general, Garrick has never read as someone who didn't feel like the power that he was given was enough. So he doesn't really check that motivation box, I feel like. With regards to Garrick or Bodhi being the new brothers, I have seen a theory hole brought up about it couldn't be either of them because people feel like Imogen's POV and Xaden's POV are happening exactly concurrently. If that's true, then people feel that there's no way Bodhi or Garrick could have made it to the southern canyon where Xaden is that quickly. It's possible this theory hole actually supports the idea that Garrick is the new brother because he could have turned and then walked, I guess, and that's how he would have gotten there so quickly, with which Bodhi probably doesn't have an easy way to get there, especially with his dragon being kind of injured and not in great shape. And so I do concede that this is like kind of a good point, assuming that the timelines line up. But I did think about this a little bit more, and I actually don't think that the timelines are directly overlapping. I think that they are a little bit staggered. We get kind of like the last third of one lining up with the beginning third of another, or maybe like a little bit more of that. And so that would leave some wiggle room and some time in between POVs, I guess. In addition, I almost wondered if it's not that the brother and the unconscious dragon are right there with Xaden in that southern canyon, but now that Xaden is Venin, right, we know that Venin develop like heightened senses, for example, sight and hearing and things like that. And so maybe it's that Xaden can see farther out And so he's actually like looking farther beyond and sees the brother in the valley over. Because the way it's described, he says, I look past Berwyn and Sigale over to the valley, basically. But we don't know how close the valley necessarily is. I don't know. That's just like a possible option to explain this like little theory hole. Because I do agree that if it turns out that the timelines are concurrent, then I would have to figure out how they got there.
I agree. Putting together a very complicated puzzle in the dark.
Right. Anyways, moving on to some totally crazy new brother suggestions. I have seen Brennan be suggested. However, Brennan was literally there in the final chapter at Ryerson House. To be fair, we don't know what he was doing between when he was spotted escorting Taryn and Tiny and Ree's POV and then chapter 66 at 3 a.m. But I don't know. It seems a little far-fetched to me. Plus, I think if he would have turned, his eyes would still be red-rimmed. And so, like, Violet would see that, presumably. Like, I don't think he would have had enough time for that
down.
feature. Yeah. To power down, for that feature to go away. So
I agree. This just doesn't track or add up to me. It's also noted that he takes Mira to a secure location and it then is later seen at the top of the pass mending civilians, riders, and flyers. I also want to point out, we don't know how long Brennan knew Xaden was a Venin, but Brennan was in Erasia for most of the time post Xaden turning, and I just don't think he found out until later. So that would contradict the, how could someone who watched me struggle for the last 5 months? I'm taking Xaden's words there at face value, and so there's a very limited number of male characters in the book that knew Xaden was a Venin for 5 months. And that pretty much knocks out a lot of the outlier contenders.
Mm-hmm. Next kind of crazy suggestion, Riddick. I have seen some people think this. I do not believe this one bit. But I will say there are some things that like kind of minorly match up like in a weird way. So
no, how dare you?
So Riddick is last seen in Ree's POV in chapter 63. And, you know, we don't hear anything else about what's happening with him. But to be fair, we don't know anything about anyone who was stationed to protect the pass after Ree's POV. So he's not the only one. Also, Riddick only found out about Xaden like maybe a month ago. I don't have the exact timeline of this, but he is not somebody who's known for the past 5 months. So
agreed.
Now, he does minorly fit for someone who may not feel like what he's been given is enough, because he does push back on people assuming that he's not capable because of his comedic nature. But that doesn't read as him being concerned about his power. It's more of like a personality thing.
And a perception thing, I think. Yeah.
Okay. This is one that feels kind of weird to me. So Riddick's name, when you Google this, means from the smooth field or man of the field. And Xaden looks past Sigale and Berwyn to his new brother and the unconscious dragon lying in the valley beyond the canyon. And valley and fields, pretty similar.
Okay, you know what I thought of when you said that? Riddick, I fucked like a third Gamlin. Like he plays the field.
Maybe she was getting crafty with the name in there, and that's what it was.
That makes
about.
much more sense to me than him being the new brother.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I do feel like from the smooth field or man of the field, kind of interesting. Riddick also has a brown dragon. So if people are thinking about the brown dragon that's unconscious, maybe that's where they got that from. Last but not least, Riddick also has an ice signet. And knowing what we know about iciness for being Venin and how, you know, Xaden describes his feelings when he is a Venin as being ice, I was kind of like, well, maybe there's like a very large leap to get that to fit. But maybe.
Yeah. I'll also add that based on Riddick's reaction to finding out Xaden turned Venin, it just seems really, really out of character for Riddick to even consider turning, even if he was faced with death. He just seemed so upset. I don't know, just based on his reaction, I just don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
The last potential for the brother that I have seen on the interwebs is Auric. This is kind of a Chaos Queen one. Hypothetically, if Auric has precognition, it would be possible for him to have known that Xaden was Venin for 5-ish months, even though he was not specifically told. It's also the line of, he's the last person I would expect to turn, does align with Auric's character. So much of Auric's character is built on the foundation of this rejection of his father and brother, Halden, the actions and how they perpetuated the lies that Navarre sold to everyone and refused to help and intervene. And there's lots of language about Arik saying, you know, I will likely die in this war. And he has a very altruistic nature. And so it has been speculated that he possibly meets the criteria that has been laid out for who could be the new brother, and that he turned Venin because he had a precognitive vision that showed he would have to turn to achieve XYZ goal, which would allow XYZ to happen, right? You can really go down like the domino effect of he has to make this choice, so all these other pieces will fall into place. So of all the chaos theories, this is my favorite one. I find that intriguing. I don't think it's likely, but we do see Arik. We know he leaves. Supposedly, he's bringing up the soldiers from Zanal, but we don't hear or see from him again. So it's a possibility.
I agree with that. It's really interesting to think about specifically because of his signet. Arik's been doing all kinds of crazy things because of his signet without telling anybody.
You're right.
I mean, granted, all of these things have generally been well-intentioned and for like the greater good of fighting against the Venin. I mean, he delivered a dagger that killed Theophany and all. And so his precognitive visions so far would indicate that all of his resulting actions from that have been with the goal of defeating the Venin, but maybe it's totally possible that he had some kind of vision that was like, you're going to have to turn, do it now.
It's the only way, you know, so yeah.
Who knows?
Rebecca Yarros, I think. I think she's the only one. You know what? Does Rebecca Yarros even know? I'm not actually convinced. I think she's still deciding.
All right, moving on to the next theory. This is a discussion of Violet and Xaden's fated love or being mates, potentially. I also kind of like looped in here this idea that maybe Violet has Xaden's last piece of soul. So throughout our coverage, we have continuously discussed how it feels there's something deeper between Violet and Xaden outside of the fact that they are linked because of their mated dragons. While I don't personally feel ready to say that they are mates, because there are no other human characters we see this type of relationship from so far, there is definitely something magical, you could call it fate, or just like unique about their case. There's a long list of things that support this, but here are some prominent details from Onyx Storm. Narelle and Devrelli tells them what you call the divine intervention of love, we call alchemy, two substances combine to make something entirely new, not unlike what's between the two of you. That was in chapter 24. In chapter 39, Xaden tells Violet, wielding to protect you has always been an instinct, but now it's uncontrollable. I mean it when I say you own my soul. You're the only place I feel completely like me anymore. We also have all the constant use of mine language and Xaden worshipping Violet. For example, the very cringy, spicy scene over chapter 48 and chapter 49. For example, you had lines like, even when I'm not entirely me, whatever I am still craves you, needs you, only wants you. My control when it comes to you is an illusion. You are the temple where I worship. My power, my body, my soul. It's all yours.
My neck, my back. That's what I hear when you say that.
Thighs and the little cries. My neck, my back, my body, my soul.
Oh my God.
And then in chapter 65, you also had Xaden's line that said, the bond between violence and me is the kind of magic that has no explanation. So that all kind of is the evidence that supports this idea that there is a much deeper, potentially magical kind of like fated love between Xaden and Violet specifically. But by the end of Onyx Storm, I would actually like to take this a step further and say that Violet and Xaden's soul, or like their essences, are actually linked now.
Ooh.
So in chapter 65 of Xaden's POV, when he feels that warm thread of love from Violet, and it says, Violet's voice cracks the cold, and a silken thread of warmth wedges itself in the opening before it seals shut, locking it in place. And then he thinks, I love her. That is the motion I cling to, the fire of pure power burning at the feeling's edges. And I know if I take it any further, it will be the next and final piece to float away. Xaden was losing more of his soul as he channeled and presumably turned ASIM to save everyone and Drathis, but he still has some of it because Violet's love stopped him from continuing to channel and draw more power. I also believe that the thread of love will continue to help guide Xaden to Violet or remind him of that love as he goes on this Venin journey, presumably through book 4 at least. Furthermore, Xaden hatches the plan with Sigale, and as he's thinking about himself, he thinks, what even am I? And then he answers that and says, hers. We strongly believe that he was referring to Violet, and then shortly after, we learn that Violet and Xaden are married by the priestess of Dune's temple in Erasia. When Violet wakes up in chapter 66, she finds the note from Xaden that says, it's yours now. And I strongly felt that that line had double meaning to refer to both Tyrandor and Xaden's soul. To continue, we know Dune is one of the gods who changes souls. Violet was already partially dedicated and is favored by Dune, so I believe something about the marriage involved a linking of Xaden's leftover soul to Violet because she has this relationship with Dune, and therefore it would help protect it. Plus, the one priestess owed Xaden a favor because they all protected Dune's temple. We have seen that the gods have the power to kill the Venin, as was demonstrated by Dune's wrath against the Theophany with the carved marble dagger. So I totally believe it's possible they can intervene in other ways if necessary, but maybe it does require some sort of trade, thus where something like dedication comes into play. Honestly, like part of me kind of wonders if Violet and Xaden both dedicated themselves when they got married. I don't know. That's a little bit of a half-baked speculation that I don't feel like ready to full send yet. But regardless, Violet and Xaden are linked even more so than they previously were at this point.
First and foremost, that was chef's kiss. I think that I definitely feel very similarly. I'm not ready to call it mates either, but it definitely feels like there is something behind what I'll call normal human devotion and love. And as you pointed out, there is a lot of language to support that. I also want to add that I still loved your analysis from our last deep dive episode where you said that when Violet wakes up on the steps of Ryerson House and she reads that note that you mentioned, don't look for me, it's yours now. He is in fact talking about the last piece of his soul and not Erasia. I think that analysis is so great. Like when you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that is such a Rebecca Yarros thing to do. And I loved that. Lorraine, I believe you also speculated that getting married in Dune's temple also likely had some effect on linking them together in more of a soul connection. And so all of those things together really push me in the direction of something faded, something beyond just, but daddy, I love him kind of vibe.
Yeah.
You know?
It's deeper than that. Yeah.
It's deeper than that, exactly.
So, moving on to the next theory, this was all Addison. So, this is where she posits the idea that Violet is the human criterion.
I first had this thought back in our deep dive chapters 56 to 60. You guys got to have that with me in real time. So, what I'm going to say here is pretty similar. I have fleshed it out a little bit more, but here we go. My question was, what if Violet is the criterion for humans in the same way that Andarna is? In chapter 60, Violet is talking to Bodhi, and he says, has to, magic requires balance, right? Theophany appears and says, it's the oldest rule there is, but once a century or so, we get a chance to skew the scale in our favor, and I will prove myself to him this time. Lorraine and I's thought is that if having Violet will tip the scales, then it seems likely she does not have a balance, and it's the control of the person who wields lightning, aka Violet, and the choice that person makes that will determine which ways the scales tip. So, based on that information, what if Violet is a physical manifestation of a criterion for the evolution of humans and their choices and how they respond to the control of that power? Based on the book, it's probably fair to say that magic is a gift from the gods. That's a pretty standard trope in fantasy books. All power, all magic has a source. And usually it's divine in nature or it is nature itself. But we know that the existence of Venin proves that power can corrupt, and humans have about a 650-year history of treating the gift of power badly and corrupting it. And so nature basically is like, well, let's see if you've earned your right to continue access to that power. So once a century or so, a lightning wielder will manifest, and the person who manifests that power is the criterion for humans. I also wonder if this is why Andarna chose Violet, because she and Violet are mirrors for the balance of power for both dragons and humans and how they coexist together. In my opinion, this idea is further bolstered for me because we know Violet has this unique relationship to the gods because she was partially dedicated to Dune, and we know there's also another who curries her favor. So when we're talking about power being a gift from the gods or divine in nature, the gods definitely play a role in that. And we know that Violet has a very unique connection to not one, but two of the gods. My last piece of evidence to support this is in chapter 41. Andarna says, "Did I pass a test? You were just testing me, right? To make sure I'm fit to visit our den." The female Irid responds, "You were never the one being tested." The female sighs and looks over at me. "You were." Then Violet says, "I'm sorry." And the Irid responds, "You should be. You failed." The female Irid also says, "The fact that you defend her actions is a testament to their failure as a society." And so I feel like that language is pretty heavy-handed and indicative that while Andarna is also the criterion, in a way, what they're really testing is society and humanity and how they abuse the power or magic that's given to them from the divine or nature. So I think that Violet is the human criterion. I don't have like a ton to say about this in terms of my reasoning, but there's always been this question of why did Andarna bond Violet? What made her decide to hatch, right? The only little hint we get is Andarna is like, "I heard the elders talking about a writer to come with the mind of a scribe and the heart of a writer, and I knew I had to pick you," which tells us absolutely nothing. And there's a lot of questions of like, why would the elders be talking about that? Why would that mean anything to Andarna? And Lorraine, I know you've talked about you think that Andarna has some precognitive abilities and she got something special going on with her. So when you combine all that together, I think it's possible that Andarna chose her because Violet herself is chosen by the gods for a specific purpose, that being potentially deciding how the balances will tip, good or evil.
Well, actually, and that all segues kind of perfectly into my feeling that perhaps the Irids are connected uniquely to the gods. And so if the Irids are messengers to the gods and they're judging Andarna, then it would make sense for them to also be judging Violet and perceiving her on behalf of the gods as well. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so,
well.
I like yeah. I like this a lot. And
Me too.
Yeah.
Not just because I said it, though.
All right, so moving on to our next theory, God Watch theories. In general, I strongly believe that the gods are coming into play in a much bigger way. In particular, I think Dune, Malik, and Loyal are going to be particularly important as the gods who are known to change or deal with souls. Dune and Loyal are also the only two gods who require lifetime dedications, and there is no way that is mentioned for nothing. I think it's totally possible Violet will complete her dedication, or perhaps someone else, like Xaden, will dedicate themselves to the gods as a cure or for some power or soul-related purpose. We also know they have yet to go to Loisum, the last major isle that is known to worship Loyal, and that is definitely for a reason. We will hopefully find out in book 4.
Lorraine, do you think that maybe we'll finally get some damn answers?
I hope so. I also feel that there is a much greater link between Tyrandor and the gods, more specifically Dune. I went into a full discussion of this in our episode covering chapters 50 through 55, but the cliff notes are that Arik had a vision stating protecting Dune's temple was the key to saving Tyrandor in chapter 51, and that obviously you kind of have to think, okay, well, why Dune's temple over any other, especially when I think Amari's temple, I believe, is the biggest one in the area. It's like kind of a known landmark. When you're thinking about Dune and Tyrandor and everything, Tyr is the Norse god of war, and Dune is the goddess of war in this world. Aracia has connections to Greek origins, meaning highest form of moral and intellectual excellence, and the history of Tyrandor suggests that they are on the morally right side of history. I've called out many lines connecting Xaden to Dune or the gods in general. For example, while they're in Deverelli, when Cortland has his men attack them, Violet says it's one step past fury, as though Dune herself has stepped into his eyes and now appears back at me. He's Xaden, but he's not. And then also back in chapter 35 of Iron Flame, Violet had stated something similar when she said, I look up into the wrath of Dune in the form of gold-flecked onyx eyes. Last but not least, Lyra specifically stated Aracia will be the haven for both dragons and griffins to flourish under the specific wardstone that was created there. That implies to me that there is definitely something unique about Aracia and presumably Tyrandor, and I feel that this location has a stronger connection to the gods in some way.
I feel that Onyx Storm really blew the door wide open for any and all kind of god play If you've listened to literally any other one of our deep dive episodes, you know Lorraine is the God Watch expert, so I don't have much to add in this regard. I think it's safe to say they will continue to play a very important role in book 4 and 5. I do have a lingering question to sort of pose generically, and that is, will the gods appear in a physical form in this series? As of right now, my answer is no. I think it's really hard, but I think no. I definitely feel like their presence, their temples, their slicing the soul from Theo's body, kind of like that vibe will still be at play, but I'm not fully convinced that they will appear in a physical form. Like, we'll actually have actual interactions with the gods.
That's fair. That's fair. I think I was like, we're going to see physical manifestations of them, and maybe I should reel that part of it back in. But I agree with the part for sure that the power of the gods for sure will come into play, either through their servants or like magical objects of some sort.
Something.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Moving on to the next theory, which is discussing other potential leadership members who could be Venin or working with the Venin, or just other people that we think could potentially be Venin. So starting with General Atos, I wouldn't say Atos really has a reason to want more power. He is a writer and is the current commanding general over Biscayeth, having taken over Lilith's job. It's possible he may want more in the future, but at this time, it doesn't seem like a strong possibility. I do accept that he's not Venin. He just really drinks Navarre's Kool-Aid, but I still don't like him, and I would feel very vindicated if it turned out he was Venin or was working with the Venin or ends up doing so in later books.
I would also feel pretty confident saying there really isn't any evidence in supporting that he's a Venin. There's no quick mention of his tired red eyes or anything like that. And in fact, his personality and response to his own son deserting Navarre and going to Eratia and all that makes me feel like he is way too loyal to Navarre to actually turn. But while we are on this subject, I also want to mention that an outstanding question I have in relation to Colonel Atos, which may speak to his motivation and actions throughout the series, is that where is Dane's mom? And rather, what happened to her? For me, I feel like it's safe to assume she's dead or Venin, but she's not in the picture and like, oh, she's stationed somewhere and we never see her. It seems intentional that she has not been mentioned yet, and I think that's going to play a role in our story for Dane and Colonel Atos and speak to their motivations and their character arc. So I am very curious about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess also to add, I really want to know what Atos' signet is.
Yes. Oh my gosh, you're right. I forgot we don't know his signet.
Anything about that.
That's so true. And I mean, he's risen pretty high in the ranks, so he has to have a pretty decently powerful signet.
On to our next potential candidate, Markham.
Ooh.
So this was mostly a me thought. Markham does possibly fit the bill in terms of someone who may not feel like the power he has is enough because he is a scribe and does not have access to a dragon or the power that you can get from a dragon. But he does have power in terms of like authority as the curator of the scribe quadrant. I'm also just kind of keeping a close watch on Markham because he is the current curator for the scribe quadrant. Markham has a great deal of authority over what can get published and how information is presented or translated. The way that, events are portrayed or the story you want told is often crafted to kind of align with a certain voice and what you choose to allow to be seen versus what you keep hidden. I would imagine the process of deciding which information is public or not, or at what level of access information needs to be at, is not just set by Markham. So I'm not going to lay like all the responsibility on him. But I think it would be super useful for the Venin to have some infiltrated within the scribe quadrant permanently. We do know one of the ways the Venin invaded Biscayeth in the beginning of Onyx Storm was by disguising themselves as scribes. Jack Barlow has also said that the Venin have already been amongst them in Biscayeth for quite some time, probably as early as Fourth Wing outside of Jack himself. And if you were to have a Venin amongst the scribes pretty high up, then it does help the Venin conceal information that could be damaging to their cause, aka any research or any history about them could easily be erased, and therefore, kind of making it harder for people to know how to defeat them or learn about them.
That's fair. My hang up with Markham being a Venin is more from a zoomed out literary perspective. All of the characters serve a role and a purpose in our story, and I think that for the most part, Markham has already served his purpose. I asked myself, how would Markham being Venin drive the story? And I just couldn't come up with a meaningful answer. For me, he was there to show Violet's departure from her desired path of being a scribe. And I think we pretty much wrapped up that part of Violet's story arc back and forth wing. Of course, it's a possibility. I just think we're kind of done with Markham. Like, he'll pop up once or twice in the story, but I don't think he's going to continue to be in the story in any meaningful way.
Fair enough. Next, Kaori. This is 100% unsubstantiated, and it's just a vibes suggestion.
And it's just you. How dare you, Lorraine?
I generally agree that Kaori is just a harmless old man who nerds out on dragons. My small suspicion is only due to his fascination with the Empyrean and wanting to know everything about them and the differences between the two factions we were beginning to see in terms of the Eurasian dragons versus the Navarian ones. This, however, is also just Kaori's job, so it makes total sense that he would want to learn as much as possible about them. I also don't really see Kaori having a reason to want more power since he is a rider and has a dragon, although perhaps one day he could get tired of being relegated to a professor status because of his signet. Like, you could flip that and be like, well, maybe he feels chained or held back because his signet is so useful from a professorship standpoint, so they won't ever let him do anything else, I guess, or whatever. But
that's fair. I could see that being a motivation, right? Like, I'm more than just an illusionist who can show pictures of dragons to first years. I can wield power in battle or whatever. But I don't know why. But I just really like Kaori. And so I absolutely do not want to believe he's involved with the Venin in any way, shape, or form. Part of the problem is that in my headcanon, he is Professor Flitwick from Harry Potter. And I just cannot picture that character being bad or evil in any way, shape, or form. And so it's a no for me. On a more serious note, I just don't see what his motivations would be. I think he likes being a professor. I think he likes learning about the Empyrean. Yeah. So it's just like, But I mean, it's worth mentioning because you never know. We don't want to get got.
Never let him know your next move. I feel like that should be Rebecca's tagline, honestly.
Dude, yes. Like the blurb at the top of the book from another author, Rebecca never lets him know her next move.
Yeah, basically keeping us on our toes all the time. So the next possible candidate, Takaris. King Takaris, I should say now.
Ooh,
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Something is weird with him. He's got that weird black pillar in his palace that I pointed out. It's like this one brief line about it that seemed kind of mysterious, and we never learned anything else about it. His ongoing relationship with Deborelli and his second home being on the Isle. The fact that everywhere around Krovla was drained and yet Corden still stands. Also, Queen Mariah's sudden death by the Venin and how Takaris was in line for Paromial. It all just seems a little convenient. Although, again, there's not a whole lot to point towards that. It really could have just been an unfortunate circumstance for Queen Mariah. And Takaris was already, in line for the throne anyway. And so that's just what happened.
I don't think Takaris is, but I will say the most suspicious circumstance is, as you mentioned, that Corden has been passed over. It's surrounded but completely untouched. And that does seem pretty sus to me. So it's odd. I'll say that it's odd.
So as far as reasons that he wouldn't be, though, he did help the quest squad get to the Isles and gave Violet access to his library to research the Venin. Seems like he has a pretty extensive collection on all of that. And also, if he is Venin, why construct his palace with drained stones from the Barrens? I doubt he'd be concerned about doing all that. Or he probably wouldn't be concerned about the Venin if he was one. So
fair enough. I don't know why I'm so resistant to the idea of him being Venin. I really have no valid reasons, just vibes. But I will say of everyone we discussed, he actually seems like the most likely candidate, in my opinion. Weirdly enough. I don't know. I just don't believe it. The last person in leadership that we have to discuss is Melgren. I know I discussed this early in the episode when we were talking about signet balances, But to briefly recap, I don't see what his motivation could be. He's bonded to the most powerful dragon. He's an incredibly rare and special signet, and he's as high up as you can go in Navarian leadership. So he's the least likely candidate to me, actually.
Yeah, that's fair too. Plus, Coda being an elder and everything.
Come on.
It seemed kind of odd for that to kind of happen. So, all right, moving on to the next topic, possible relationships that we'll see play out.
Yay! And this is my favorite one. Okay, so my personal favorite, Sloane and Dane. There are a couple times this is alluded to in Onyx Storm. When the first years insist on helping with the quest god, Dane is chastising Sloane for not training her signet, and it's described, asshole, she whispers, and the flush in her cheeks deepens. Then Violet thinks, I lift my brows at the look she shoots him, mostly because I can't tell if she wants to stab him in his seat or gets cut off. Fuck, Garrick mutters. We talked about this in that episode, but I feel like this was a very clever writing trick of Rebecca Yarros. And if Violet is sensing something, I'm sensing something. Because Violet 100%. Knows Dane, I just was like, okay, yep, that's where it started, right?
Yes, agreed.
And then another piece of evidence is when they're all arguing about how to protect Drathus, and Sloane goes swinging, and Dane is the first one to grab her, and he whispers something to her, and then she goes back to formation, and I'm like, ooh, what did he say? And then, of course, my absolute favorite, eyes here, and most damning of all, when Sloane says, I'm going to hurt you, and Dane responds, Gods, don't I know it. It's giving sexual tension, it's giving burgeoning love, and I'm here for it.
Yes. I agree with that. Enemies to lovers.
Enemies to lovers, baby. The second plausible pair would be Mira and Drake. There's much less evidence here to support this, but their whole vibe when interacting is just like mean flirting. Not quite enemies to lovers in the same way, but it's just like, I don't know, their dynamic is kind of hard to describe. But specifically when they're talking about the name for broccoli, and Mira's just like, why not call him carrots? He's orange. And Drake responds, just to frustrate you, Soren Gale. It just feels very flirtatious, Again, I really don't have a lot of evidence, but I still feel pretty solid about it, to be totally honest.
I agree with that. I think Mira and Drake were doing some mean flirting at times and stuff.
Yeah.
Like arguing and discussing formations, like that whole whatever
battle
they
maneuvers.
were on the aisles. Yes. Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt a little undercurrent there. So
there's a fine line between like love, hate, and passion, and how they all blend together, I wish I could think of like a way to describe it, but it's giving love. It's giving burgeoning love.
So the next possible one, and like, guys, this is totally like a bullshit one, so don't take this one too seriously. I simply included it because I have seen it as a possibility, but some people believe maybe there's something that will happen between Kat and Auric. And mostly it's because they wonder if perhaps this is how Kat gets a crown or fulfills like the ruby gift meaning from Zanal. But personally, I feel like Kat's royalty feels more aligned with her becoming Queen of Peromiel on her own. And I just want to see her get a crown on her own because boss bitch, So
I think it's interesting. However, I think it's more likely that Takaris will die and then possibly Serena, her older sister, and then Kat will take over. Yeah. Or Serena survives but abdicates and she's like, I just want to be a flyer. I just want to rule Cliffsbane Academy and train the next generation or whatever Serena's path is. And she lets Kat rule. Is how I see it going more.
I guess as we're thinking about this too, I think maybe another thing related to Kat and Auric was like in relation to peace and like unification maybe between Navarre and Peromiel long term by having some kind of marriage. And so then maybe they're like, okay, Kat and Auric. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? Moving on. The next theory topic, are dragons gods? I have seen a few different Reddit posts suggesting like various versions of the dragons being gods potentially. And these posts basically suggest perhaps each dragon color or den is associated with a specific god. For example, black dragons represent either Amari or Malik, blue dragons are ruthless, so they represent Dune, etc. I don't feel confident enough to say that all dragons are gods, especially considering Tairn, back in Fourth Wing Chapter 17, had that line where he said, dragons pay no heed to your puny gods, and in general, the dragons are quite arrogant as a species, and they seem to not care that much about the gods that humans worship. I'm not going to say no to dragons being gods or being connected to gods, but I'm not going to fully say yes yet either. So I'm kind of like in the neutral about all of them being connected to gods. I will, however, say I believe the Irids may have a unique connection to Dune or the other gods. So first of all, Irid means iridescent, rainbow, etc. But in Greek mythology, it's connected to the Greek goddess Eris, who is the goddess of rainbows and served as a messenger of the gods. Rainbows in general symbolize a connection between heaven and earth, so perhaps the name Irid is pointing to a connection between the Irids and the gods. When we finally meet the Irids in chapter 40 and 41, they use a lot of seemingly religious terminology. They refer to threshing as harvest. They call Xaden and the Venin abominations and tell him your kind is beyond redemption. They also generally take this outsider perspective to judge and measure the actions of humans and the other dragons. And they even use Andarna as a criterion through which to measure humankind's progress. And this, all is seemingly a godly thing to do, if you ask me. In addition, Andarna and Leothin both showed up at Dune's temple to help. And Leothin's name is derived from the Gaelic word Leothin, which means warrior or fighter. And I can't help but connect that to Dune being a goddess of war. So next, I'm going to actually pivot to an adjacent theory. So while we know Irids are magic, perhaps that magic is of a different source, or it means that they come from somewhere else. My theory is that the Irids have sky magic, or maybe even come from the sky, the heavens, if you will. And that's what makes the nature of their power so strong and different. This would also tie into the idea that there could be a greater connection between the Irids and gods as messengers for the gods. The Irids possess capabilities that supersede what dragons can do. For example, they can break and forge bonds, they can communicate with anyone with their little slide whistle thing, and they can change their colors and blend into different environments. We also highly speculate Andarna was the reason Violet, Taryn, and Andarna could communicate while they were on the Isles, a place where no other dragons and riders could communicate or channel their signet powers, and there was no magic. Throughout the series so far, we have seen this repeated idea about drawing power from the sky or commanding the sky. In chapter 31 of Fourth Wing, there's a whole paragraph on various stories and fables, but in particular, Violet notes another talks about the dangers of wielding power from the ground instead of the skies, as one could easily start drawing from the earth and eventually be driven mad. In chapter 37 of Fourth Wing, the excerpt literally said, but it was the third brother who commanded the sky to surrender its greatest power, who finally vanquished his jealous sibling at a great and terrible price. And then within that chapter, the Venin that stabs Violet with the poison-tipped dagger had told her, such untapped power. No wonder we were called here. You could command the sky to surrender all its power, and I bet you don't know what to do with it, do you? Furthermore, thinking kind of like chronologically about how Xaden channeled from the alloy in Violet's conduit in Deverelli, when Violet sees him again in chapter 28, Violet describes his bond as glittering onyx, and Xaden tells Violet, I slept, and I feel oddly, well. I can't remember what we thought at the time, but knowing everything now, I actually wonder if Violet did imbue this conduit, but it was with Andarna's power. And so then, how odd that after channeling from this conduit, Xaden feels better and then proceeds to keep his control for over 73 days. Right? In chapter 49, we learned that since the Deverelli incident, he'd gone 73 days, and then presumably more than that up until chapter 65, when he channels to save Draethys and everyone around him. In chapter 26, Violet did reach for the conduit and notes, I swear I can feel a hum, a swift rise in heat that I know is only in my head. And knowing what we know about the Irids, I'm kind of wondering if this was her imbuing it with power from Andarna, since presumably Andarna was the only other one that could channel. I think we also mentioned the possibility of it already being imbued when she brought it there, but I don't know. Just very interesting that Xaden goes many days without channeling after that point. And from that channel, it was also the time when Xaden's gold flecks turn amber permanently.
I literally wrote, in Lorraine we trust. I've seen this theory about the dragons actually being gods, and I find it interesting, and I think it has potential. I just don't feel confident enough to say yes or no yet. But I am leaning towards no, to be totally honest. So I know that's not nearly as detailed or offering evidence. So no thoughts, just vibes here. But I know you do all the hard thinking for me. So I didn't have to do too much.
All right. So the next topic is the Empyrean actually good or bad? I personally am still not sold on the idea that the Empyrean is necessarily bad. I just think they have a lot of secrets and do not disclose many things to humans to protect their own kind. I feel like if they were truly bad, they'd be doing much worse things to humans, but for most dragons and riders that we see, they generally have like a mutual relationship of care, love, and respect. I continue to feel the Empyrean is beginning to split, though, as we've discussed. So we are seeing like some dragons continue to support Navarre's cause while others don't, and this causes more division and secrecy because the dragons themselves are no longer unified. I do find a little bit odd, though, that the Irids view the dragons as both separate and despicable for the behavior on the continent. The Irids in Chapter 41 said, "Our breed is born for peace, not violence like the others," and dragonkind has not yet learned their lesson either, referring to the dragons gifting humans with powers that were ultimately used as weapons, like what they viewed Andarna as. I will actually say, have seen, kind of in connection to the idea that the Irids channel magic from the sky or possess like sky magic, or like maybe they come from the sky as their source of power, and how potentially there's an idea that maybe that was the original way that everybody was supposed to access power, but over time something happened. The other dragon breeds started channeling from the ground. And so like that caused a whole different thing. And so it leads to this idea that maybe the dragons are corrupt because of that, because the Venin also channel from the ground, you know?
Okay.
And so because
Yeah.
they are both sources that channel from the ground, they are doing it incorrectly, or something about doing it from the ground has caused a
Like
great
a
corruption.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're going to say that the Venin are corrupt for that, then, you know, maybe the dragons are too. I don't know yet. I'm not entirely sure about that at this point, but overall, I don't necessarily think that the Empyrean is bad and evil per se. It's like genuinely evil-hearted and corrupt.
Yeah, I don't think anyone can say that they have evil intentions. For me, it's pretty hard to navigate because overall, I think you're right in general. They are fighting on the side of good versus evil. What I call into question are the dragons like Bade, Jack Barlow's dragon, or Solas, which was Varish's dragon, or Panchek's dragon. It would seem Bade's dragon for sure knew that Jack Barlow was a Venin and said nothing and did nothing. Solas seemed pretty evil, and if Varish was a Venin, which is highly speculated that he is, same thing. And for Panchek, whether he was Venin or not is irrelevant. He still betrayed everyone, and his dragon never said anything, never communicated that to anybody. And I find that pretty suspicious. Not to mention, there's just a lot in general that it seems that the dragons have been not forthright with or have purposely misdirected. I know I kind of ranted about this several times on the podcast, but like Violet will have this epiphany, and it's something that both Andarna, Taryn, whoever do the whole time. And they're like, you needed to figure it out yourself or it wasn't worthy. When Violet is literally putting her life on the line every day to ultimately save their hatching grounds. And so I just find them frustrating, and I don't understand their intentions and their motivations. And I know they have secrets. That's why their hair is so big, because they have secrets.
Yeah, I definitely agree that they have a lot of secrets and they're not forthcoming with information. That's true. I guess the point about Bade and Solas, I feel like that kind of goes back to this point that the Venin seem to be alluding. Once you become Venin, you can kind of flip the bond almost and like control your dragon instead in a way. But then you also have Xaden, and Sigale seems to be normal and fine. But that could also be because Xaden's choosing not to do anything to her as a Venin. I don't know. It's a blurry line with them, I guess, and like what the situation was that caused Bade and Solas to go along with Jack Barlow and Varish's evil shenanigans. But I don't know. We'll have to think about it more. Or wait 2 years and just think about it then. Later on.
That sounds better to me, honestly. My brain's tired.
Yeah, I don't want to think about it anymore. All right, so moving on to the next topic. Possible cures for the Venin. So obviously this is all a little bit hard to figure out. You can't really say anything definitively because there's not really a lot of evidence for anything, but here are some like possible options that we came up with. So love, first and foremost, quite cliche, but could be, considering it's the one thing that stopped Xaden from completely losing himself in his POV scene. Love was also the reason he turned in the first place, so maybe love will need to be the same way he gets back to himself. It's possible, though, that this will be more of like a self-love type of thing, because back in Fourth Wing Chapter 10, Xaden told Violet, you want to know why you're still alive, because you're the scale I currently judge myself against. Every day I let you live, I get to convince myself that there's still a part of me that's a decent person. We've seen throughout the series that Xaden carries a lot of emotion from everything that's happened to him, and we know he's done some not so great things, even if it was for the greater good, of the people that he cares about. But I would imagine there's also a little bit of self-loathing kind of mixed in there too, based off of that line. So that's kind of why I was like, well, maybe it's going to be more of an individual self-love journey than like a Violet and Xaden love journey. But it could also just be, but it could also be like the love between them too, because obviously that has been hugely influential within the book. So another possible thought, perhaps it will involve the gods. Theophany was only killed because of Dune's wrath after she shunned her grace by presumably severing the final piece of Theo's soul, or at least that's what I think. We also know that both Dune and Loyal change souls irrevocably, and Malik takes the souls of those who die. So perhaps there will be some sort of dedication trade where, in exchange for service, the gods can restore Xaden's soul, or maybe they will need to make some kind of other deal or sacrifice on behalf of his soul in some way. Next idea, the Irids. Maybe there is some special ability with their magic that can restore or replace the magic Xaden stole from the ground, so it can be returned to the ground. We also have wondered and discussed the possibility of the Irids' magic actually being from the sky. Drawing power directly from the ground corrupts people and turns them venin, but perhaps drawing power from the sky or another source could heal or cure you. But we also know that the Irids themselves stated that there is no cure. And it's only when they confront the abominations that they have become and try to change could they ever fix what they are. So that didn't leave us with a lot of hope. There was kind of an interesting theory posed on Reddit. I titled this the Venin Ice theory from what this person said, and it was from Olives and Chocolate. It's not so much a theory as it's positing the idea that because ice can thaw, then it alludes to this idea that Xaden can be cured. So Olives and Chocolate says, while the Irids told us that there is no cure for Venin, after reading Onyx Storm, I believe that Rebecca confirmed that a cure does exist for the Venin, or at least for Xaden, through using the metaphor of ice to represent becoming Venin throughout the book. They say ice is not untouchable, it can melt, crack, transform, evaporate. It's a temporary form of water, completely shaped by its circumstances. Rebecca could have used any other hard surface as a metaphor for Xaden's transformation into a Venin, for example, rock, glass, stone, concrete, etc., but she very intentionally chose ice. So then we get a bunch of quotes about all of this icy feeling, which we have talked on multiple occasions about. And then they say, however, the ice is repeatedly shown to melt with time. After Xaden's first strain, the bond between Violet and Xaden is described as a thick wall of chilled onyx and sealed by a wall of chilled onyx. But by page 94, the bond is merely blocked. No mention of the influence of ice whatsoever. So then it's also said with respect to Xaden's bond with Violet, when he hasn't channeled, it's described as warm, shimmering shadow. And so we do kind of see this idea that warm, hot feelings are the things that change or transform the ice, I guess, or the cold of a Venin. All in all, there's a cure for Xaden and the Venin because ice can melt. And they also alluded to this idea from, Xaden's final POV chapter when that little thread of Violet's love cracks the cold and a silken thread of warmth wedges itself with the opening before it seals shut. So yeah, we'll link this one in the episode description as well so you can read all of it, because there's several other details that I didn't read fully at this time. But it was like an interesting thought. I like the metaphor of it. I like this idea that because ice can melt, there is a path to changing, transforming, curing Xaden's veninness. So,
well, it's just interesting too, because the ice is used so much throughout the book, right? Xaden skating on the ice. Anytime Violet tries to penetrate his shield is a wall of ice. And so maybe it is meant to imply something deeper than just, descriptive language. So that's interesting.
Right.
I also have to point out, as much as I hate to say it, it's possible there is no cure. There's that infamous line from Fourth Wing, there's no cure, there is only control. And maybe our characters have to find a way to live with it. Or if there's no cure, then it opens a door for the possibility that maybe Xaden will have to die of Venin and then somehow be resurrected. That's a big possibility. I've also seen it speculated that Sloane and Brennan will come into play. Somehow siphoning and mending will combine to cure Xaden as well, throw in a little Andarna magic, and you've got a interesting magical cocktail that maybe will cure Venin. I've also seen the idea posited that nature likes things in balance, and in order to restore Xaden's soul, someone will have to give up their soul, aka someone will have to die. So there's some question about how that would work and who it would be. So there's a lot of possibilities for the cure. I don't feel optimistic. I'll say that. I do not feel optimistic in any way, shape, or form.
Yikes. Okay, so this is just kind of a random theory that I found on Reddit. I just think it's kind of interesting. I feel like I would have to go and kind of reread through this lens to see if I fully believed it or not. But it did pique my interest, and I found it really interesting. So this person, Casually Late 1019, left a post that says, Papa Sorrengail's death investigation complete. After a thorough reread of all 3 books, I have gathered all the facts regarding Papa Sorrengail's fateful demise. Second Lieutenant Asher Daxon Sorrengail, in fact, was not murdered in the library with a dagger, nor was he turned Venin and sent east to the Barrens by his jilted Venin lover Theophany. Papa Sorrengail's final fateful heart attack was due to the extreme burst of energy released when sweet Andarna finally hatched in the Vale. Here are the receipts. As supported by the Easter egg dropped by Rebecca Yarros in Iron Flame Chapter 43, this would be similar to the energy the cadets felt when the first egg hatched in Eratia as they were hiking the cliffs of Draelor. I imagine the amount of energy released would be on a much larger scale since Andarna was an Irid, and we know that Irids are pure magic, enough to end his life, especially if he has been experiencing smaller bursts as he researched Feathertails in the months leading up to Andarna hatching, which, I mean, it kind of lines up with this idea that obviously Asher was researching Feathertails. So maybe. They allude to a couple points. So Iron Flame Chapter 43, it's described a pulse of star bright energy courses down the bond from Taryn. Whoa, Sloane says, putting her hand over her heart. What was that? I felt it too. Marin blinks. This person continues to say that the birth of an Irid, because he was researching Feathertails, is possibly what killed him. Asher also calls Violet his brightest light, and his letters throughout Onyx Storm, so the star bright energy wording stuck out to them. And Andarna said in Chapter 64 of Iron Flame, I waited 650 years to hatch, waited until your 18th summer when I heard our elders talk of the weakling daughter of their general. The girl forecasted to become the head of the scribes, and I knew you would have the mind of a scribe and the heart of a writer. You would be mine. And they asked, did Andarna consider Asher an elder and hear him speak of Violet? Was Asher communicating with Andarna before or right before she hatched? Did Asher possibly hasten Andarna's hatching by talking about his love for Violet? Maybe she overheard Lilith talk about Violet at some point too. They also bring up how Andarna's eggshell, when they brought it to Deborelli, still has magic, and Violet had described a charge of energy runs up my arm and I lift my brows at the sensation. They also kind of tie in this idea that we don't have knowledge of scribes bonding to dragons yet, but could Andarna have unknowingly bonded to Asher while in her shell, if a bond was even necessary for him to feel the magical energy burst? And then the bond broke when he died. We know Irids can break and make bonds pretty easily now. They also point out there's probably a magic likes things in balance reason to throw in there too, from the perspective of like, take a life to give a life. I don't know. It's kind of fun to think about. I'm not heavily invested in it, but we'll link it in there if anyone feels interested about this idea. But it would be kind of poetic, I guess, if Asher was researching Feathertails and Andarna hatches. Something about that energy was so shocking to him that, I mean, I guess tragically poetic, I should say.
And Andarna killed
poet.
Asher. Wow.
But also, in a way, he like died researching something that was really important to him. I don't know. So Like we said, we'll link it, but just an interesting thought there.
I do enjoy the theories that are well-researched, but are like, meh, but why? But they're entertaining, but I don't have to be invested in them. I do like that.
Right. Yeah. All right, so to move on, we do have some fan theories or theory ideas that were given to us from some of our listeners. So one of our first theories comes from Megan, and she asked, why does Imogen dye her hair? It's funny because I quite literally have never really thought about this, unless it's pointing to the idea of Imogen's lineage being someone else. And so, like, she dyes her hair so that she can't be recognized. And then as I started thinking about it, I was like, okay, wait, I think I totally know where you're going with this, because I've definitely seen some random Reddit theory posts about this idea that Imogen maybe has more of a important lineage than we know so far. So,
okay. I'll be totally honest. I have never given this a moment's thought, not even for a split second. Honestly, I just thought it was because she was a badass. And, lots of the writers, purple hair, blue flames, tattoos, piercings,
right.
That's just the vibe. When I read this, my thought was, what if Imogen also has silver hair because she's also partially dedicated to dude and she dyes it to cover it up? I mean, if we're going to go down this rabbit hole, we may as well go deep down it. But I think it's an interesting question. Ultimately, I'm going to say it's a fun theory. I think Imogen is very important to the story, but probably not in that way, and probably nothing to do with her hair. Probably much more to do with their two badass signets.
Yeah. I will say, I think it's fairly common for a lot of writers to dye their hair and alter their appearances and whatnot in different ways because they like to. I haven't thought too extensively about this. If we get some more Easter eggs that are like, ooh, I would have to keep track of Imogen from here on out and just track what she looks like, or if she says anything a little bit odd here and there. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, overall, I think she just likes to. So the next one is from Sukanya Gang War. That is the username. Their theory here is that Liam is still alive. And in parentheses, they said, I can't come to the terms with the fact that he is dead.
Fair.
Yeah, I was going to say, I cannot either. I will say, though, I think I have to stick to my guns on this one. I do really think that Liam is dead.
I have bad news for everybody. I hate to break anyone's heart, but Rebecca Yarros has publicly confirmed on her Onyx Storm tour that Liam is definitely dead and that she has to kill characters we love to raise the stakes and have us invested. She's like, because if you don't think I won't kill anyone, there's no peril when they go to battle. And so she's like, yeah, he's dead. And, I wouldn't put it past Rebecca to say that. And then boom, book 5, Liam Venin. But I really, really don't believe so. So R.I.P. Liam.
Oh, sad. All right. So those were some die on this hill questions or theories that they wanted to talk about. But the next category is kind of just funny, just vibes theories. So I found a funny Reddit post about just people's headcanons. I screenshotted a bunch of comments, but there was one from a person named Falathina.
Yeah.
So they list out a couple different ones. Riddick counts lightning strikes when Violet and Xaden are together. He likes to see if Xaden will beat his previous record.
Well, that actually tracks because remember when Violet and Riddick are having the conversation after they find the Irids? And he runs into Xaden and he's like, that lightning wasn't from,
Yeah, right.
Oh.
Another one, Bodhi intentionally cuts his hair in a similar way to Xaden because he thinks it's funny to scare people. He's playing on cousin, looking similar thing.
I love it.
That's funny to me. Another one that I thought was really funny out of this collection was one where they said Atrim tries to give Riddick flirting tips. He gets these tips from listening to Taryn talk to Sigale. It's really funny to me, the idea of the dragons listening to each other and just
I love that.
So another collection of headcanons, just funny ones, was posted by Gold Advertising 419. And some of the ones that I liked were Andarna tells the hatchling stories of her adventures with Violet, Taryn, Sigale, and Xaden. That's cute. Another one, Coda snickers every time he witnesses Andarna and Taryn bickering because Taryn was the same way with Coda at that age.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. This was kind of an ode to Violet's poison skills. The Sorrengail children would prank each other with mild doses of poisons under Papa Sorrengail's tutelage.
Yep.
So no one got seriously ill. How Violet became a poison expert.
I could see Brennan and Violet doing it, but not Mira. Mira's like, this is childish, because poisons are not really Mira's strong suit.
Oh my god. Okay. Dane enjoys Sloane slapping him in bed. Hence his Zelda card. His gift from Zanal.
Oh my god, that is
getting
pure
spicy.
gold.
That's hilarious, though.
Oh my god.
And then I really liked this one. Lilith named Violet after the first flower Asher gave her when they started dating. She was secretly sentimental as fuck.
Oh my god. Yes, headcanon. Canon. I love that.
I love that.
Absolutely.
That was really cute.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then my last one that I saw that I really liked was posted by someone with the username OKParticular4877. If a dragon signet is a result of a relationship between the rider and their dragon, then the marked one signets are a result of what their parents wanted most for them before they died, or maybe what they wanted their children to provide to the rebellion since it will now be in their hands. And then they provide examples. Garrick's parents wanted a way to get Garrick out as quickly and far away as possible, thus his distance wielding. Xaden's dad wanted him to know the truth, so I guess shadows, or intrinsic with that one. And then Imogen's wanted to build a wall around her to shield her, so with the stone signet.
Now I'm sad, Lorraine. Why would you do that?
No, but I don't want to say it's cute because it's not cute that their parents died, but it's poetic.
Okay.
I like it, though. Headcanon, yes.
Headcanon.
All right, so we have some more funny just vibes theories from Megan. First one she gave us, Brennan is Venin because of the rune. I'm assuming you're talking about the rune-shaped scar on his palm and how he has watched Xaden struggle for months with being Venin.
I don't see it. He literally pretended to be dead and did not see his family for 6 years to fight in the revolution. However, I will say the rune-shaped scar is absolutely important. There is no denying that. But we talked about this earlier in the episode too about the new brother. I just don't think Brennan is a Venin. Now, will he turn in the series? Maybe. I could see him doing it to save Violet, Mira, whatever, but I don't think he is right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. That dang rune-shaped scar, though.
Mm-hmm.
I swear if we never get the backstory on that, I'm going to be real upset here.
So I'll burn my books. I'll burn them for Malik.
All right, so the next one from Megan. Broccoli is important.
Megan, I'm with you. Broccoli is important.
Same.
Just a fun little theory I've seen that he's actually a mythical creature in a cat's body, which is kind of hilarious. I've even seen people go so far to be like, he'll play a role in the cure, or he'll help them find something important. I mean, he is a gift from Zanal. And we know all of those gifts are important. So I could totally see it. Broccoli is important.
Ooh, I like this a lot too. Protect him at all costs. All right, so another one. Dune and Loyal equal the cure, or Violet equals Dune plus so many other 1 in a million things, or Xaden equals Loyal. I'm assuming you were referring to cure options or character to God connections, which I mean, basically agree. We've talked about how we feel like Dune and Loyal, or maybe some of the gods could be related to a cure. Violet obviously is connected to Dune and then another god that creates her favor, and we've talked about some possible options for that too. Also love the idea that maybe Xaden is favored by Loyal, or will be dedicated to Loyal as a possibility. So lots of options out of that one. And then the last one from Megan. Why is Imogen one of the 4 characters with green eyes? I don't know. I watch. And I giggled because I was like, I watch eye color theory. Absolutely.
We love that shit on this podcast. We love it.
I think we know that the Taris have distinct green eyes, and that was a prominent way through which Violet recognized Auric.
Yep.
And I also believe Quinn also had green eyes.
She did, but her eyes are described as dark green eyes. So I've seen this theory. The idea is that she is related to Halden, Auric, and King Tari, presumably the bastard child of Tari and I guess Imogen's mother. It's a fun idea. The math is not math for me on this one. I don't think any Cardulo woman would ever sleep with a Navarian, especially not King Tari. So it's going to be a no for
True.
me.
Fair enough. So our next one comes from Sukanya Gang War. And they say Terran, Sigale, and Andarna are not making out of the series alive. And I was like, no, I hate that. I could definitely see Terran for sure possibly dying. And actually possibly Sigale, since Xaden is Venin. But I for sure believe that Andarna at least will make it because she is A, an Irid, and B, could sustain Violet's life if Terran dies.
This is a tricky one. I could actually see it being the other way, that Terran and Sigale live and Andarna is the one who dies in the end, and some big magical sacrifice to save everyone that destroys the Venin. I actually think it will be the other way around, and that Terran and Sigale will continue
Now that
on.
you say that, actually, yeah. Wow. I don't like any of those options at all, though. I want them all to live.
Skip.
So, yeah, guys, with that now concludes our theories episode. Hopefully, you're feeling full and satisfied from
your
our
50
full
course
meal of theories today. So, thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fantasy podcast. As always, we're so glad that you found us. Please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today.
So stay violent.
And we'll catch you all next week. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers.
Sorry, I have a fizzy drink and it was making me burp.
Yummy.
Okay. I think we could see, or whatever. Hold on, I'm losing my train of thought.
What I call into question are the dragons like Bades. Like Bade. Like Bades. Are the dragons like Bade?
Did Asher possibly hasten? How do we say that word?
Hasten.
Hasten.
Yeah, hasten.
Did Andarna